Welcome to Creating Alternatives to Capitalism and the Consumer Culture. This is part 2, and I am Jan Spencer coming to you from Eugene, Oregon. To start off, a little bit of orientation. From this perspective, humanity's ultimate goal would be to create a society and economic system that fit within the boundaries of the natural world and brings out the best in positive human potential. For moving towards that ultimate goal of society at this point in history, let's just take a look at a few points of departure. Those would include reducing our eco-footprints in a big way. Would also include redefining what are our human needs and how do we take care of them. And in order to do that, capitalism needs to go. Capitalism can be replaced at different scales, and there are many real-life, on-the-ground examples of a preferred future and present already pointing the way towards that ultimate goal. And we do have many allies and assets to work with in almost any community. And finally, positive human potential is our greatest renewable resource. Here's a graphic look at part 1, which I strongly encourage people to check on part 1 of this presentation, Replacing Capitalism and the Consumer Culture, which included a critique of capitalism. We touched on the common denominator, progressive outreach, reducing eco-footprints, useful ideals and principles, many allies, assets, and actions. And note, you are welcome to do a screen grab of anything you see. And of course, you can pause on a slide to take a closer look. And finally, I make reference to a lot of organizations, projects, and people. At the end of the presentation, there's a list of search words so you can follow up on any person or organization that you care to on the internet. Part 1 of the presentation took a good look at capitalism, and we identified supersizing consumption as being the fuel of capitalism and its deepening social, economic, and political environmental problems. We also looked at externalizing the cost, the opposite of efficient, millions repair millions, the magic hand, social and political disequity and lost opportunities. These deep, hardwired problems of capitalism give reason for replacing capitalism. Again, I suggest checking out part 1 for a more complete story on capitalism. The common denominator. Given the problems of capitalism just mentioned, there are thousands of organizations nationwide, large and small, that exist to address the problems caused by capitalism. Environmental damage, social damage, political, economic damage, public health damage. All these organizations have a common cause. They exist to repair or address some problem caused by capitalism. Supersized consumption is the action that produces all these problems. That's why downsizing, reducing our eco-footprints is so important. There are literally thousands of organizations all over the country. What you see here in the yellow rectangle is just a partial list of categories of organizations that exist to address some problem caused by capitalism, the consumer culture, and overconsumption. Imagine these organizations embracing the idea that reducing human ecological footprints helps to mitigate the problems many of these organizations exist to deal with. And then imagine these organizations encouraging their members to downsize their eco footprints and lifestyles. And further, they provided how-to information to make those lifestyle changes, and even explained to their members how making these lifestyle changes helps the organization accomplish its goals. And finally, these organizations coordinate with each other to advocate downsizing to the general public, civic leaders, business leaders, and elected representatives at all levels. The remaining content of the presentation is examples and information organizations could share with their membership, how-to information pointing to these examples. Maybe our membership could be doing some of these projects and practices. And of course, people are free to take on these types of projects in their own lives as they wish. Groups and organizations could send out educational information either specific to their own particular issue, or they could coordinate with other organizations. With the information they send out, it could be in newsletters, in their magazines, on their websites. Easy to access information for reducing eco footprints. Again, we went over these in part 1, but we do have these ideals and principles, how to figure your ecological footprint. The virtuous triangle is a great simple concept. Permaculture is another powerful tool. Resetting our priorities with time and money. This educational coursework would also explain what downsizing is about, what it means to reduce your ecological footprint, and what are the benefits. This slide is a potential reality check. The assumption is that in a sustainable future, virtually everything will cost a lot more, and what people earn in their jobs will be a lot less. That assumption is based on the premise that an economic system in a sustainable society will be honest. By honest, we mean that what we pay for a product or a service will reflect all aspects of that product or service, such as the environmental cost of extracting raw materials, the environmental and public health costs of manufacturing, use, and disposal of that product or service. The economic system we have now externalizes the cost, does not tell an honest story about the product. Public health and the natural world pay for those external costs. So this slide suggests what certain types of products and services currently we're familiar with won't make the cut in a sustainable society. And of course, this is the short list. The affluence we're familiar with in modern middle-class America is heavily subsidized by damage to the natural world and public health. The transformation of our society to sustainability will not likely be a seamless process. From this perspective, important during that process would be a mechanism we could call truth and reconciliation, somewhat based on what happened in South Africa to deal with their apartheid history. An economic truth and reconciliation is appropriate. The captains of industry and their political allies need to acknowledge the damage they've caused people and planet for generations. And along with reconciliation, we should also include truth and restoration of the natural world, and truth and compensation for those victims of capitalism and the consumer culture. These images on this slide are just a small sample of what this restoration, reconciliation, and compensation might look like. Allies and assets are social and physical entities that can be useful for transitioning towards a sustainable society. Allies could be nonprofits, faith communities, environmental organizations, food banks. Assets could be public space, private property, front yards, even streets and parking lots. Actions take place when those allies and assets come together to help move our communities, our society, and our economy beyond capitalism and the consumer culture. The remainder of this presentation is a show and tell of allies, assets, and actions. A preview of a preferred future and present. Let's first visit River Road Neighborhood. This is a neighborhood where I live, here in Eugene, Oregon. This image shows a small part of our River Road neighborhood. The yellow rectangle is my quarter-acre suburban property, and the other rectangles represent friends and neighbors who are permaculture friendly. Many of those locations have features to produce basic needs on site and reduce ecological footprints. We'll take a closer look at some of them. Imagine the stories here and how-to information going out to millions and millions of members of different organizations in newsletters, on websites, in magazine articles. The top two images are next door. My neighbor turned his driveway into a garden. And the bottom photo shows over my backyard fence. My new neighbors have just built a number of raised beds and have more ambitious plans. A driveway and a grassy backyard, both assets repurposed for increasing home-scale food production. Dharmalaya is a couple of blocks away. It's a 3/4 acre property. The top left photo shows the straw bale structure. It's a beautiful 1,000 square foot studio where all kinds of wonderful positive events have happened over the years. Something like a neighborhood clubhouse. Eugene hosted the Neighborhoods USA conference in 2014, and our neighborhood hosted a site tour for out-of-town visitors. Guests from all over the country, like Roanoke, Virginia, and Birmingham, Alabama, had no idea people were taking actions to transform their suburban neighborhoods like this. Here's another property just a couple blocks away. This place is a full acre. Half the property was covered in blackberries. Now there's a 200 by 100 foot garden, a 90-foot greenhouse, and a micro eco village. And we've also had countless educational events and neighborhood social activities here. A neglected, unused property has become a neighborhood resource. Here's my backyard. My place, a nice example of home economics, where I take care of substantial amount of important basic needs right here on the property, including food, energy, and water. Thousands of people have visited over the years to see what suburbia can look like. A nothing special quarter acre becomes a community and even regional asset, a preview of a future beyond capitalism and the consumer culture. Transforming suburbia could be a core part of a new post-capitalist, people and planet-friendly economy and culture. Organizations would send out how-to educational information to their members, including how to set up a site tour where participants can visit properties that are making these planet and people-friendly transformations. This site tour met at the park down the street from my house and visited nearby properties, including my place and my beekeeping neighbor next door. One of my very favorite assets is our neighborhood association here in River Road. Many cities have neighborhood programs. That means neighborhood associations that might meet monthly, and they exist to address the issues of importance in the neighborhood, like traffic, land use, infill, crime, homelessness. We have a strong permaculture and resilience preparedness element to our neighborhood association because people who participate help make that part of the agenda. When you participate, you help make the agenda, and the neighborhood association can put this kind of people and planet-friendly information out to a wide audience. I'm on the board of my neighborhood association, and truly this has been and continues to be one of the most satisfying experiences in my life, to work with others to make our neighborhood a better place to live. This image just shows the different committees we have in my neighborhood association. There's all kinds of ways people in the neighborhood can participate. Our neighborhood has been working with the city to create a new neighborhood plan. How would we like our neighborhood to evolve over the next 20 years? We've made sure there's a lot of permaculture and progressive content in this neighborhood plan that includes issues like eco-footprints, local food production, and restoring the environment. People in our neighborhood work with the city to improve the well-being of the natural area along the Greenway. The Greenway is a really important asset in our neighborhood. We've had community events and all kinds of work parties. Great occasions for neighbors to meet, mix, and mingle. I have a written agreement in triplicate with the city for looking after the Filbert Grove. 10 years ago, the grove was completely covered in blackberries and English ivy. This restoration is a collaboration between people in the neighborhood and the city. This location is less than a quarter mile from the Filbert Grove. Another wonderful neighborhood activist is the ringleader for restoration of this oak prairie savanna. The city provides native plants. These work parties are a lot of fun, and it's great to see progress both with the restoration of the environment and people making new friends. Still, another very important asset we have in our neighborhood is the recreation center. Many neighborhoods and communities have a rec center, a community center, and if they don't, perhaps a faith community location could act as a recreation neighborhood center. In 2019, we had the one-day Community Resilience Festival with all kinds of neighborhood and community organizations, plenary sessions, breakouts in the classrooms, a lot of fun, a lot of education, a lot of community building. Our local rec center and the neighborhood hosted the 2015 Northwest Permaculture Convergence. We figure something like 700 people participated one way or another. There were classes, plenary sessions, bike tours, expo, and much more over the entire weekend. Essentially, our neighborhood recreation center became a 3-day university of alternatives to capitalism and the consumer culture. There are community recreation centers all over the country that could be used in a similar way. We've had dozens of site tours over the years all over the neighborhood and many other site tours in Eugene to check out what friends and neighbors are doing to produce more basic needs at home and nearby. A church in the neighborhood has made space available for a community garden, with more plans for an orchard and other edible type landscaping. A mature post-capitalism, post-consumer culture suburbia might look something like this. This image shows a typical, nothing unusual suburban strip mall in Eugene, Oregon, a mile from where I live. There is enormous potential here for a new kind of suburban downtown that would be friendly to bikes, pedestrians, and transit. Multi-story residential could be constructed on the parking lot with professional offices and retail down below. That's nothing unusual. The whole idea is to repurpose this strip mall into a commercial location convenient for people for taking care of more of their needs, so cars become far less needed in everyday life. Matt and Jessica prioritize a lot of time and effort into making their suburban property a community resource to show what suburbia could look like. Only a few blocks from Matt and Jessica's place, there was a city right-of-way, but the street had never been built. On a bit of a slope, the site was very soggy, but folks in the neighborhood identified it as a place that could be a wonderful neighborhood garden. They went to the city was cooperative. 6 months later, they had groundbreaking. It's an all-for-one and one-for-all garden. They've had 2 neighborhood grants to build the information kiosk and a tool shelter. I know people who have moved into friendly neighborhood because of this garden, and it's a wonderful place to learn gardening, make friends, and build community. It used to be a soggy patch of grass. The Eugene School Garden Project is one of my favorite nonprofits. They've built gardens at dozens of schools all over the county, including just a few blocks from my house. Kids are taught science by gardening, and they're also taught nutrition. Many kids take what they learn back home and improve the diets of their parents. This is education for a healthy and uplifted society. Duma is a beautifully repurposed large home with a beautiful permaculture edible landscape. Residents share their lives and a beautiful home and a great opportunity to reduce their eco footprints. 2 more images of Duma Cooperative. The top image is the backyard. It's an edible food forest. The site used to be a gravel parking lot. The bottom picture shows an educational site tour. Imagine an article about Duma in the Sierra Club's monthly magazine that goes out to over 3 million people. Block planning is a land use tool for reworking either a residential or a commercial block. The city of Eugene recognizes block planning, and actually 50 years ago hired a consultant with the intention of empowering the citizens of Eugene to use block planning to improve their own lives and the lives of others on the street and on the block. Unfortunately, there were no blocks transformed by this idea, but block planning as a powerful tool remains. And of course, it's even more relevant than ever for empowering people. Block planning could be reborn as a wonderful tool for creating alternatives to capitalism and the consumer culture. What you see here is a before and after block, and this is idealized. This is not a block that actually transformed. It's just a good idea. A block plan doesn't make city rules and regulations and codes go away, but satisfying those rules and regulations becomes much more flexible. This is a photo from East Blair Housing Co-op in Eugene. East Blair is not a block plan, but the co-op owns about 8 properties, and they can manage those properties in a synchronized way that simulates what block planning can do. For example, the scene here was once a parking lot. The parking lot was taken out and turned into this really nice mini park with edible landscaping, the scene for many parties. A group of neighbors with a block plan can rearrange the block in ways they couldn't do on their own in regard to landscape, setbacks, traffic, parking, and other items of code concern. Skip back to the previous slide and take a closer look. The before and after shows a lot of features that a block plan could allow. The block plan can deliver many social, economic, environmental, and even political benefits. Other cities and towns may have block planning as well, although they may refer to it by a different name. Again, these photos from East Blair. We've had many site tours here at this location. East Blair could be considered a sort of low-income retrofit co-housing. The cooperation and coordination between residents allows people to share assets and amenities like the co-op tool room. The townhouses on co-op property don't have space to have a garden, but there's garden space elsewhere on co-op property they can use. East Blair also has a community house for co-op events, but also for the wider neighborhood. Positive human potential is perhaps our greatest renewable resource. Let's take a look at some awesome examples of positive human potential. You will see the product of allies, assets, and actions. City Repair is absolutely one of my favorite nonprofits. It's in Portland, Oregon. I'm just going to read what they have on their website. Here goes. City Repair facilitates artistic and ecologically oriented placemaking through projects that honor the interconnection of human communities and the natural world. City Repair has accomplished many projects through a mostly volunteer staff and thousands of volunteer citizen activists. Here are some close-ups of some City Repair projects. Placemaking in the neighborhood shows people care about where they live. Middle school kids in Hood River, Oregon learn science and civics through permaculture thanks to their teacher, Michael Becker. Activists in Port Townsend, Washington have made use of a county program called Mapping Your Neighborhood. They've put that program to much more ambitious use by creating micro neighborhood associations, community gardens, and a wide range of other initiatives that benefit the entire town and region. The Gospel Garden in Medford, Oregon is a great example of bringing together assets, allies, and actions. A parking lot is turned into a garden thanks to many participating organizations. Neighborhood Pathways in Olympia, Washington, another example of turning a problem into a community benefit. Villages in Vancouver, Washington, and Clark County, that's across the Columbia River from Portland, are pioneers of an organization for keeping many older people at home instead of going to a care facility. Villages provides a model of organization that could be applied in all kinds of situations and conditions. Imagine thousands of organizations sending out how-to information to their memberships about projects like villages. Here are several front yard gardens. Front yard gardens are a wonderful way to put a grassy front yard to better use. The garden provides exercise, resilience, healthy food, and a wonderful way to meet neighbors passing by. Onondaga Earth Corps is a nonprofit in Syracuse, New York, that teaches both physical skills and life skills to its participants that also benefit the community. Creating a sustainable society will call on the new generations to embrace ideals, values, and goals that will serve a society and economy that exist within the boundaries of the natural world and bring out the best in positive human potential. The Onondaga Earth Corps is one such entity. Let's hope Joe Biden puts billions of dollars into an upsized National Youth Corps, and that Youth Corps operates by permaculture principles. Thousands of progressive organizations could encourage their elected representatives to fund the budgets of an expanded Youth Corps vision and movement in the United States. Patchwork Farms is a one-person project in Asheville, North Carolina, where the protagonist Sunil Patel grows vegetables on suburban properties and sells them in the local market. Sunil also founded the Patchwork Alliance, which is a network of local producers. The idea to build a more local economy based on local entrepreneurs, producers, and services, all with a social and ecological sensitivity. Corona Heights in Queens, New York City is an example of New York City's Community Plaza program. The Plaza program empowers people in the city to take initiative to turn underperforming public urban space into places that much better serve public health and community well-being. More often than not, reclaiming public space involves pushing back against cars. There are dozens of such reclaimed spaces in New York City, including the flagship Community Plaza, Times Square. Let's take a look at several eco-villages. Eco-villages present themselves in lots of different ways, but there are certain common denominators. Perhaps the first common denominator, building community, building stronger personal relationships between those involved. Another common denominator may be ecological, to reduce eco-footprints. All the eco-villages identified here are retrofit. They weren't built new. They all are repurposed existing urban infrastructure. Enright Ridge Urban Eco Village is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Its founder recognized a community building potential on his own street. Enright Ridge is a great example of assets, allies, and actions. Imagine the Sierra Club sharing a story about Enright Ridge with its 2.5 million members. Not everyone on the street at Enright Ridge is active with the Eco Village. It's all voluntary, but a lot of people are, and they have a lot of activities going on that benefit both those actively involved and the entire street. Maitreya Eco Village in Eugene is in a 1950s era neighborhood. The 1.5 acres is owned by one person who lives there, who is very much permaculture and alternative minded. The Eco Village is home to about 35 people. There's a huge garden space in the middle of the property. You can find lots of natural building and unusual structures. Maitreya has had encounters with the city land use officials, but has emerged relatively unscathed. One former village member bought a property next door and took down the fence. It's been great to see Maitreya evolve over the years. The Eco Village is a great example of making creative use of 1.5 acres. This is the front door and front yard of Duma in Eugene. We took a look at Duma just before block planning. You can skip back about 23 slides and have another look at Duma if you like. Columbia Eco Village in Portland is a retrofit co-housing. There were some apartments and the remains of a farm in this 60s era neighborhood. Kailash Eco Village in South Portland is another retrofit eco village. Both Kailash and Columbia Eco Village are just wonderful examples of repurposing existing urban infrastructure. This is N Street Co-op in Davis, California. They have a website. Almost an entire mid-60s suburban block has been transformed in the backyards. All the fences are gone. Notably, the group went to the city and asked for a zoning change that would allow them to build a community house. The city granted them that zoning change and they were allowed to build a very nice community house. They would not have been able to do that on their own. Again, this isn't specifically a block planning project, but the zoning change is something that block planning could deliver. Have another look at the graphic of block planning a couple of slides ago. You'll probably be able to recognize more changes than you could before. Imagine thousands of progressive organizations encouraging their members to take on these kinds of projects to transform where we live and bring about a healthy economy and reduce eco-footprints. Our challenges are not technical. Our challenges are social. This is a very interesting project here in LA Eco Village in Los Angeles. The Eco Village with over 50 residents is already well established. Check the images. And the Eco Village is a great story all on its own, but there's another story I want to focus on. LA Eco Village has the capacity to extend itself out into the neighborhood. The Eco Village bought an old gas station and car repair place. You can see it labeled. The plan is to turn it into a community center. And then you see the street, Bimini Place. Los Angeles has a rule that under certain circumstances a street can actually be closed and turned into a pedestrian location. With a parking lot on one side of Bimini, LA Eco Village will have the entire property from First Street all the way down to White House Place. The longer-term intention is to close that street to car traffic and turn it into a pedestrian civic community plaza. I am just rough guessing that there are hundreds of thousands of other similar locations in cities all over the country where something like this could also take place. Stories and information going out to organization members could call their attention to wonderful opportunities we all have all around us wherever we live on behalf of social, economic, and environmental transformation. Cars are one of the most iconic products of capitalism and the consumer culture. They are hard to live without, but increasingly they're becoming more difficult to live with. In the media, I recognize a significant shift in public attitudes towards automobiles. Pushing back against cars is pushing back against capitalism. Imagine thousands of progressive organizations encouraging their members to help create personal and social alternatives to using the car so much. Let's take a closer look. Streets used to be for people. This image from perhaps 1905 Manhattan shows a lot of activity out in the street. The street was a commons, but not to over-romanticize. The living conditions for most people here probably would not suit the average middle-class American at this point, but the street is full of life. City streets are now designated automobile zones. Cars take up a far disproportionate amount of space. An increasing number of cities are pushing back all over the world. This image from part 1 of this presentation is a good example of automobile external costs. What we pay for cars and gas doesn't cover the cost of all the social, environmental, and ecological damage they cause. Maybe pause here and take a closer look. Imagine what we could do with the money spent on cars if we didn't spend the money on cars and then we didn't have to spend so much money repairing the damage they cause. That's the double benefit. This graphic compares bicycle trips made in cities all over the world. Of course, cities in Northern Europe look the best here. Portland, Oregon in the U.S. is often regarded as one of the most friendly bike cities in the country, but it pales in comparison to even the second and third tier cities in Northern Europe, much less Amsterdam and Copenhagen. Organizations sending out information to their members would include educational content like this. 2 images of pushing back. One is a car-free downtown in Groningen, Holland. The new town's urban design is intended to make automobiles inconvenient. And the image below, Portland, Oregon, where a riverside multi-lane highway was removed in favor of a park. I lifted the large photo from a video documentary on Pompeii. Bollards are like small barricades intended to keep cars from going past a certain point. Urban planners in Pompeii 2,000 years ago used bollards to keep wheeled carts out of the public pedestrian plaza behind where the photograph was taken. Pushing back on vehicles goes way back. Middle-class suburban wives protested automobiles in the United States in the 50s because lots of kids were being hit by cars. Thousands of citizens in Denmark and Holland protested against cars in the 60s to prevent what happened in the United States from happening in their countries and cities. This map is from where I live, Eugene, Oregon. Some historical information. A number of divided highways were built in Eugene, but in the 60s and 70s, public opposition stopped many miles of divided highway in Eugene. Miles and miles of highways that would ruin the character of Eugene. Thanks, Mark Rabinowitz, road scholar, for doing the research on these failed highway projects. Dallas, Texas. I lived only 2 miles from where this interchange now exists. At that time, it was an early divided highway, Central Expressway, and a country road named Valley View Lane. There were no valleys in the area, it's too flat, but there were cotton fields, and this was the edge of town. Home scale, pushing back on cars. A friend and I are depaving my driveway. Earlier, we saw some images of Kailash Eco Village in Portland. This beautiful garden occupies the same location of a former parking lot. In the United States, there's something like 8 to 10 parking places for every car, and there are about 250 million cars and trucks in the United States. That's a lot of parking places that could turn into a garden or better use. Parklets come in all sizes and shapes, wonderful creative designs, occupying where automobiles used to park in many cities around the country, and even more now because of COVID-19. The Embarcadero Expressway in San Francisco, certainly one of the most well-known and celebrated removals of a freeway. Big shout out to the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989 for assisting the removal of the expressway. Thousands of progressive organizations could motivate their members to help stop highway projects before they're even built, like this example here, the Southwest Corridor Project. Much of the right-of-way was bought and buildings were removed, but the locals said no way. They stopped this freeway project in Jamaica Plain and Roxbury neighborhoods. Pushing back on cars doesn't have to be quite as dramatic as stopping or removing a freeway. There are millions of miles of urban streets in the United States that could be made far more bicycle-friendly. A big help for making that transition is for people to know the issues and know what the opportunities are for making their neighborhoods and homes and communities healthier places to live. There are locations in Europe that have gone significantly further in pushing back against cars than anywhere in the United States. We have a lot to learn from those cities and towns. Beograd, Yugoslavia, White City, has a wonderful, beautiful downtown car-free area. What you see here is an emerging network of bicycle freeways in Copenhagen, Denmark. Some of them extend more than 10 miles out from downtown. These bike freeways would not share space with cars. Copenhagen has determined that investing in bicycle infrastructure actually saves the city money. while spending money on car infrastructure costs the city money in terms of public health. The Vauban Neighborhood in Freiburg, Germany is celebrated as a location that has pushed back on cars. More views of Freiburg. Take a pause. Imagine if where you lived looked more like this. This comparison of urban footprint is startling. The footprints shown here are in scale. Atlanta and Barcelona have about the same metro population. Atlanta takes up about 25 times more space because it is so automobile dependent. Houston, Phoenix, Dallas are just about like Atlanta. Historically, the United States has invested enormous amounts of money and material in the automobile culture. Much of that damage is going to be difficult, if not impossible, to repair. Still, urban restoration will be a huge part of the effort and the economy of a sustainable society, and the sooner we move in that direction, the better. Thousands of progressive organizations can help by encouraging their members to be a part of this transformation. Again, Atlanta compared to Barcelona. Pause here for a minute. This is a very educational graphic. Atlanta and many other big cities in the United States have really built themselves into a corner. The star attraction of Barcelona's urban mobility plan would have to be the superblock. Cross-town traffic would not be allowed on the blue streets indicated to the right, only on the yellow streets. Cars would still enter the superblock, but only delivery vehicles, emergency, and people actually living within the superblock. Check the red square to the right. Much of that intersection would end up looking like the photograph above. Cars could only use the periphery of that intersection and only at a walking speed. The idea is to improve the choices for bikes, walking, and transit, to reduce noise and air pollution, and to build community. Several superblocks are already in place, with only 100 more to go. Barcelona's superblocks certainly are one of the most ambitious urban transformation projects anywhere in the world. This is pushing back on cars at industrial scale. The summer of 2020 saw municipal elections across France. Some observers describe the results not as a green wave, but a green tsunami. Many cities elected progressive mayors, and many of the platforms for those mayors was and is pushing back on cars. Anne Hidalgo, mayor of Paris, perhaps could be seen as leading the charge. This illustration shows what perhaps a typical residential street in Paris may look like. The intention to trade cars for people space and rework the different areas of Paris so people can take care of more of their needs closer to where they live, and to reduce the noise, improve the air quality, and just upgrade overall quality of life. Imagine the year 2035, after 10 years of organizations encouraging their members to shift from cars to bikes and transit. Maybe this could be a scene in Boston or Kansas City or San Francisco. One could easily observe our economic system dominates our political system, and of course that means it dominates democracy, or what is supposed to be a democracy. Please have a good look at this content. This graphic is closely related to the previous slide and is also related to what follows for the home stretch of our presentation. Restoring democracy means reducing the power of big business. And one of the best ways to accomplish that task is to quit buying the products that don't fit democracy. No surprise, those are about the same products that don't fit sustainability and a healthy community culture. Please pause here for a few moments. This will be a good prep for what follows. The further up the political and economic food chain, the more challenging the task. But ultimately, moving beyond capitalism and the consumer culture starts at home in our own lifestyles. And from this perspective, that absolutely requires greater home production and reducing our ecological footprints. The thousands of progressive organizations have a critical role to play to motivate, activate, and educate their members. Millions of jobs can be created on behalf of home economics. Food storage is a fundamental part of self-production and home economics. Imagine pickled broccoli, beets in the ground, canned fruit and veggies, and all the rest, part of creating alternatives to capitalism and the consumer culture and building democracy, all at the same time. Increasing the scale of social, economic, and political transformation. That is the intention of this two-part presentation. And of course, there are many, many examples. You've seen only a few in this two-part presentation. There are many allies and assets for helping to bring about paradigm shift. Our task is to put them to good use. A lot needs to happen to bring about economic and political democracy, especially at a higher scale. Here are several items on that list, and the scope of this presentation doesn't take in a great deal of detail on economic and political democracy. People have written books and articles about this subject. Still, we'll take a look at some examples, and you are definitely encouraged to do your own research on economic democracy and political democracy. A public service called public option could be one of the most important tools we have for bridging where we are now with a more preferred future. A public option is a universally accessible government-provided good or service that coexists with the private sector. And we already have public options: schools, parks, libraries, highways, transit. They don't prevent private services, but public options exist to serve the public good. They are not for profit and can have charters that commit them to public and environmental health and well-being. Reforming the current economic system should be done in a way to set up a more ambitious process for moving beyond capitalism and the consumer culture. Our 42nd Avenue in Portland, Oregon is a small, locally controlled, progressive economic development agency, sensitive to the needs and the character of the neighborhood it serves. Imagine state and national programs that could help other neighborhoods set up their own economic development agencies to serve their particular needs. A small example of economic and political democracy. State and federal programs could assist the creation of similar organizations to the Patchwork Alliance in Asheville, North Carolina. This is all about building local economies and small-scale entrepreneurs, providing healthy products and services to the community. Residents and community organizations near the Crenshaw Mall in Los Angeles have raised enough money to make a down payment to buy the mall and the property which is for sale. Imagine this real estate owned by local entities and being used to benefit the local community. Imagine government programs that could assist local citizens for making this kind of investment in their neighborhoods. The province of Emilia-Romagna in Italy is well known for its density of cooperative businesses. Co-ops and worker-owned businesses are an important part of life in Emilia-Romagna. And take a brief look at the Macoro Law. This is national legislation in Italy that benefits political and economic democracy at a much larger scale. A public bank is an example of a public option. Best to pause here and take a closer look for yourself. Paying for these changes to move beyond capitalism and the consumer culture won't be cheap, but the money is already there. The challenge is, how do we perceive this transformation? This historical project will be far more successful if we see it as a humane and sensible undertaking rather than as a business opportunity, something of a public option paradigm shift. Again, the wisdom of the world's great spiritual traditions is a very useful set of ideals to move us forward. Paying for paradigm shift will include what we do with our own money at home. Enlarging the scale up to community, state, and federal level will mean repurposing existing budgets in favor of sustainability and paradigm shift. There is no shortage of money for paradigm shift. Recall this graphic from part 1 of this two-part presentation. Millions of jobs exist to repair the damage caused by millions of other jobs. Which brings us to the double benefit. Part 1 of the double benefit is we repurpose and we have priorities with how we spend our money, both public and private. Instead of buying stuff that does not move us towards our sustainability and paradigm shift goals, we redirect that spending, public and private, for productive and positive outcomes for people and planet. Part 2 of the double benefit. Those poor choices about how we currently spend our money amount to trillions of dollars in avoidable damage. Imagine we quit spending money to create damage, then we don't have to pay to repair the damage. That is the double benefit, and it amounts to trillions of dollars in just a few years. The double benefit, in effect, doubles the amount of money we have available to bring about paradigm shift and a sustainable society. Positive human potential, our greatest renewable resource for moving towards a preferred present and future, beyond capitalism and the consumer culture. Here are the main points of the presentation. Please pause and have a good look. And finally, Here are the benefits that could be gained for creating alternatives to capitalism and the consumer culture. If you resonate with parts 1 and 2 of creating alternatives to capitalism and the consumer culture, you would also be interested in these conversations and these presentations. Feel free to pause and take a screen grab. Here's a resource page that can help you do follow-up on the people, projects, and actions mentioned in this two-part presentation. Share what you learn with your friends, and best wishes.